Well, hello and welcome to For a Green Future. Could you please share with us your name and who you're with?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Tara Zuardo. I work for the Center for Biological Diversity in our Endangered Species Protection Program.
Okay, thanks so much for coming on, Tara. I wish it were under happier circumstances, so we're going to be talking about what the Trump administration has just decided to do to the Endangered Species Act. Before we get into what he's done to it, let's just do a quick recap of the ESA itself. Um, why is it called like one of the most successful conservation laws in history?
Well, it's considered to be that precisely because it goes beyond direct take of species and has incorporated this protection of ecosystems. And in doing so, it has effectively addressed threats, the number one threat, which is habitat destruction and degradation, to species before they have a chance to go extinct. So, although species have to reach a certain point before they can get listed, at that point, once they do get listed, the Endangered Species Act has approximately a 99% success rate at preventing extinction, precisely because it does protect habitat.
Mhm. And by habitat, you mean like I don't know, like how big of an area might get protected if you had an endangered bird living in an area, for example?
Yeah, so by habitat protection, meaning that um, those areas that are necessary for the species in terms of necessary essential behavioral patterns, including breeding, feeding, or sheltering. So that's what we mean when we say protection of habitat. It's the species' home. In the same way we need a home to survive and live, they need homes, obviously, to survive and live. You can't protect the bird if you cut down every tree that has nests in it, right? So
Mhm.
that's what we mean when we say habitat modification or degradation.
Okay, and yet this is exactly what the Trump administration has just decided to do.
Yes, exactly. This is part of a big, in my opinion, a bigger agenda to essentially nullify our environmental laws and get around the legal process to change our laws, which is obviously to go through Congress, knowing that they could never actually get these changes in place through Congress because of the plain language of the statute, because of how popular the Endangered Species Act is with the American public, um, and because of previous Supreme Court precedent upholding this definition, just essentially going right to the Federal Register and saying, this is what we consider to be the law. And they're doing this in many respects. They did this with the Endangered Species Committee decision several months ago, also known as the God Squad, where they decided to completely bypass legal requirements and met for 15 minutes and decided they were going to grant an exemption under the ESA that is so very rarely used for very particular reasons. They've tried to insert economic considerations into the listing process, which is completely illegal because the
Well,
Endangered
that
Species
that
Act.
that
Yeah.
decision, let's fill that in a little bit. That God Squad
Sure.
decision, that was a decision to basically allow endangered species to be destroyed by the oil and gas industry.
Right. Well, essentially, it was to bypass requirements to comply with the Endangered Species Act to protect rice's whales and other listed species as well. So in that particular case, it was ship speeds, vessel speeds as well. They have to comply with certain requirements so that they're not violating the Endangered Species Act. And this God Squad provision, as they call it, basically goes in and says, we're going to allow a species to go extinct to exempt this activity. So the only other time it's most relevant was decades ago with the Tennessee Valley Authority and the snail darter. And even that didn't kind of come to fruition in the end. So I think the God Squad has met maybe three times in the entire history of the Endangered Species Act because it's just an exemption that it does not need to get used. It does not get used because it is a very extreme exemption. And I think what this administration has made clear is that um, extreme is the status quo for them. And so, they have decided that if they don't want to comply with our environmental laws, if they want to just make that kind of godlike decision that a species is going to go extinct, that is within their power to do so.
Right. So that was step one, sort of the God Squad sort of feeling it out. But now this is the big one, right?
Yes. This
Uh,
is huge because it'll affect every species. Yes.
mhm. and basically it allows habitat destruction. It changes the whole definition, right? To what do they say
Yeah.
the Endangered Species Act does under
So
their?
it's very confusing the way that they did it. Let me explain what they did. So the definition of harm, what constitutes harm under the Endangered Species Act? It's a regulatory decision, but it's critical, right? Because regulatory decisions are what implement our laws. And so we have defined harm for decades since the Reagan administration as including habitat modification and harm to habitat, under the understanding that injures or kills wildlife, under the understanding that endangered species can't live without habitat. So what is the point of the Endangered Species Act if you're not also looking at habitat, right? So what they've done is they've just eliminated that definition of harm and said, we're rescinding this definition, but they haven't put another definition in place. I'm not quite sure why they did not put another definition in place. I'm guessing because they know that this is highly illegal and that would simply open them up to a legal challenge. They're already open up to an illegal challenge, but without putting in a new definition in place, but they've said we do not plan on enforcing the law unless harm involves a direct and intentional act against wildlife. So, for example, someone going out and shooting the animal, not indirect habitat impacts. So there's just no regulatory definition at all in place of harm. It's just kind of a here's what our opinion is, and here's what our intention to, in terms of enforcing the law and incorporating it into consultation is going to be.
Well, that certainly sounds illegal.
It's very illegal. You know, if you look at the plain language of the law, it's very, very clear. Take is defined very broadly. There's also an explicit provision, Section 2B, where Congress expressly protects ecosystems. And then again, you have not only decades of regulatory infrastructure in place where this has been incorporated into thousands of habitat conservation plans, ESA consultations, biological opinions, reliance by landowners, you name it, enforcement actions, recovery programs. But also, 1995, this exact question came before the Supreme Court, and they decided that significant habitat destruction that kills or injures protected wildlife is covered. That essentially that it is included that Congress intended the ESA to protect species from extinction and destroying habitat in a way that kills or injures wildlife is one of the primary ways that species are driven towards extinction. Therefore, it's covered under the Endangered Species Act. They're relying on a Supreme Court decision from last year to say everything's been changed now because agencies don't have any deference. It's called the Loper-Bright decision. Here's why that's very wrong. The Loper-Bright decision expressly states that prior judicial decisions interpreting statutes remain binding. That means the 1995 Supreme Court decision is still in place, that Sweet Home decision. So it's very legal on a number of levels, and I do expect a federal district court to overturn it fairly quickly. And we did file our lawsuit yesterday when it went final, when it was finalized in the Federal Register.
Well, congratulations on that. Fingers are crossed. Um, the act of protecting the habitat um, doesn't just help like whatever particular species is imperiled, right? I mean, we have found,
Correct.
what have we found when we've set aside habitat to protect somebody?
We find that it helps humans. We find that a number of species, including in places like Ohio, where you all are, the
Mhm.
club shell mussel, the northern rifle shell, snuffbox mussel, all these listed species, they clean our waters. They keep our waterways clear. There are clear indicators when there is a problem. They're the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, that there is something wrong, that there is a clean water issue, that there's a clean air issue. We have found that protecting habitat for species overlaps with protecting our habitat and our health as well. So the Endangered Species Act, I would argue, is also a very human-oriented law as well.
As you touched on this, that fundamentally the administration is deciding in favor of extinction, right? I mean, that, violating not just the sense of the law, but sort of basic decency, basic morality.
Yes, I would argue that this administration has no regard for majority of the human population, the animal population, and has essentially decided that it is going to implement an agenda of lining the pockets of its own officials and those of its friends and donors. And that's going to be the number one agenda item that they have. So whatever that takes, including pillaging land without any kinds of checks and balances in place, without any kind of protections in place, without any kind of review under the National Environmental Policy Act, environmental reviews, that is their number one priority. And they're aware that they're not going to get these changes passed through Congress, so that they're going to use whatever other means that they possibly can, whoever they've put in place in Department of Interior, Doug Burgum, and Department of Commerce, and through executive orders, they're going to essentially bypass our US laws that have been in place for many, many years and just declare what's going to be the law of the land, much like a king would.
Now, this, as you said, well, we were talking before that we knew this was coming. Was there pushback when they first proposed these rule changes?
Yes, in fact, there were over 300,000 comments submitted opposing this change when it was first proposed in the Federal Register in April of 2025. And that is why, in my opinion, they released this announcement after 5 o'clock Eastern on a Friday in a very cowardly way, because they're well aware of how unpopular it is with the American public. And they were hoping that it would just kind of slip under the radar in terms of being covered by media.
Hmm. I think that the idea of preventing extinctions is sort of a universally accepted, right? Even across
Right.
conservatives, liberals, and you know, politicians or people of every color politics. People don't want to see their generation the one where some important species got wiped off the planet forever.
Right, exactly. Think about the Endangered Species Act was written into law under Nixon. It's been a very popular law under both sides of the aisle. You're absolutely right that that the law works, that it's helping everyone and everything, that it is a fundamental right to be free from extinction, to have a right to survival, to have a right to recovery, to have a right to a functioning environment and ecosystem.
And so you mentioned the lawsuit. Um, where did you file it? What are the prospects? How's it proceeding?
Yes, so we filed it in federal district court, and I think that the prospects of it succeeding are very likely. I think that this is a really clear requirement under the plain language of the statute, and when you tend to have plain language of the statute that you can rely on, that does tend to go well in the courts, at least. That Congress was very clear when they set out their intentions for the Endangered Species Act, and then again you have Congress ratifying that understanding many times, I think 3 or 4 times since it's been in place. And again, all of the other issues that we've talked about, regulatory infrastructure in place, the Sweet Home decision, the lack of providing any kind of reasonable explanation for this proposal is also at issue here. There are a number of legal issues that I would say are on our side in terms of where the courts are going to fall.
Are there other organizations with you on this suit?
Yes, we have a number of organizations, Earth Justice and several other organizations as well.
So if
Yeah.
people want to follow what's happening here and keep up with the situation, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I would say the best way to follow that would be our website and our Facebook page, Center for Biological Diversity. We'll have regular updates on this as well. And I would also say if people feel like they're somewhat helpless right now and things are hopeless, making things clear to your representatives and weighing in and doing op-eds and just kind of this public pressure campaign is probably the best way that the American public can weigh in right now as well.
Well, thank you, Tara. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think the only thing I want to kind of make it clear so people can understand just what this means and the gravity of this situation, it's not just one slight change to the law. It's a lot like, let's say firefighters aren't allowed to respond to a burning home until it's completely burnt down. That's exactly what this is. Conservation becomes nearly impossible if agencies have to wait until endangered animals are dead before they can take action. So that's really what we're looking at here in terms of an analogy and just how this makes no biological sense at all.